All right, friends, the nose gear is installed and she looks fantastic. What we did here is we had to go ahead and clear that little area there where you can see where the arm is located, the steering arm. And you also, of course, as I mentioned before, you'll have to clear the mount up here at the front to make sure so that way you can move the assembly forward. You'll need a notch here, and a little notch here. The notch is here for the screws. The notch here is for the actual strut itself. All right, friends, let's shift our focus now to the battery tray. More to come. Hi friends, welcome to the Plain Fun RC channel. I'm your host Saul, and we are continuing with the build of the ESM models Dornier DO-335. We're shifting our focus to the fuselage and to the wing. First, with the fuselage, we have our template. The kit includes this template, and with that template, we've got a couple things we need to drill. So the hole up here in the very front of the template, that's for the anti-rotation pin. The one next to that is for the bolts that hold the wing to the fuselage, and the same is true back here on the rear of the template. Now the big giant hole in the center also needs to be opened up so you can pass the servo leads through. In addition to using the template for the fuselage, we also need to go ahead and use it with the wing as well. So with the wing, we have a number of holes drilled. So now the only thing we need to focus on are the anti-rotation pins. So it's just a matter of drilling the hole here in the front on the leading edge, and then back here on the trailing edge. So let's go ahead and get our holes drilled in the wing and in the fuselage. More to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, we are going to go ahead and take our template and put it here on the side of the fuselage where the wing is going to be mounted. And we're going to drill our 4 holes and also open up our hole back here to be able to pass our servo leads through. So let's get started. Ta-da! Woohoo! All right, that's the first part. The second part is getting this bolted in place. The answer is no. Great. Awesome. Ta-da! All right. Very good. Okay. One wing on. One more wing to go. Perfect. Yep. Got it. Wonderful. Great. All right. Very good. Yay. Got the wing on. All right. All done. All right, friends, as we continue our update, we are focusing on mounting the E-flite 160 Outrunner motor on the rear firewall. And let me show you what we're going to be doing here. So if you look at the picture here in the construction manual, you can see that the hole in the center of the rear of the firewall is sort of your demarcation, if you will, and that allows you to be able to center it. Now, when you're putting on the actual mount itself, it's got to be in an X pattern, as you can see there. Don't have it so it's straight up and down, because remember now, we are passing tubes through the top and the bottom, and of course side to side for the control surfaces. So let's talk about what we have going in here and how we were able to properly center it. So this is a clevis tool from Great Plains, and what we did is I took the tool itself and I put tape on the rear of it, because the diameter of the hole here is a little bit bigger than the actual tool. So by going through and putting on the tape, I was able to get it so that way the mount would sit perfectly in the center, because the hole of the mount is smaller than the hole here on the firewall. We also took some clear double sticky back tape, which you can see there, and that helps to hold the mount in place. Then we just simply take it, go through, and insert it into the hole like so. And then it's held in place accordingly. Now, it may not stay. There we go. Got it to stay. And that's it. And that allows us to be able to go ahead and properly center it. All right. So let's go ahead and get our holes drilled, and more to come. All right. We've got our blind nuts on our rear firewall. Let's shift our focus to the front firewall and get the motor mounted. All right, friends, we're looking at the front of the plane. We're about ready to mount the X mount to the firewall. Same technique that we used for the rear, we're using for the front. The firewall has a hole in the center. We're using our clevis tool wrapped in tape so it centers it in the hole. And then it's helping to center the X mount here for the E-flite 160. So let's go ahead and drill. All right, friends, our holes are drilled in the front firewall and our blind nuts are in place. And let's get our motor mounted. All right, friends, as we continue our update, we're shifting our focus now to installing the nose gear retract. Let's talk about what we have going on here. So first, this is the Robart electric retract. The ESM, of course, are not available. And as we saw previously, the Sierra Giant scale, they're pneumatic. I did, by the way, follow up to see what the cost would be to convert the pneumatic retracts for Sierra over to electric, and it would have been $1,400. So absolutely not. These retracts were only about $300. Anyway, so when we look at the retract here, you have to remember this was cut for the ESM pneumatic retracts that they sold for this plane. You want to look very carefully. Look at that rear hole. Notice how it doesn't quite sit in the plywood. So what we need to do is, you can see we drew a black line towards the front of the plane, and so we're going to have to trim that mount forward. And also, if you look at the steering arm there, you'll notice how it doesn't clear. It doesn't exactly clear the plywood there. So we're going to have to go ahead and move this mount forward. I think once we move it forward, then we'll be able to go ahead. It'll fit nicely. Whoops, excuse me. It'll fit nicely in the gap there. There's actually a gap there in the plywood. You can see it down below. That gap is there so that the steering arm has a place to sit when the retract is retracted. All right, let's go ahead. Let's clear the mount and let's move this retract forward. More to come. All right, friends, the nose gear is installed and she looks fantastic. What we did here is we had to go ahead and clear that little area there where you can see where the arm is located, the steering arm. And you also, of course, as I mentioned before, you'll have to clear the mount up here at the front to make sure so that way you can move the assembly forward. You'll need a notch here, and a little notch here. The notches here are for the screws. The notch here is for the actual strut itself. All right, friends, let's shift our focus now to the battery tray. More to come. All right, friends, we continue our update. We are preparing to go ahead and create our battery hatch. Let's talk about what we have going on here. So you'll notice that we've gone ahead, we've taped off the areas here where we want to cut, and we're going to talk more about that in a second. So with this plane, you've got a couple different options when you're going through and you're actually doing an electric conversion in terms of placement of the batteries. One of the first is here inside the actual cockpit itself. You can see this open area right here between these two black tubes. These two black tubes are where the pull wire for steering is going to be passed through. That gap in between would normally be where a gas tank sits. You can see the open area here and the area, the hole right here where the front of the tank would actually pass the vented area through. However, the biggest issue is that by going through and putting it there, what you wind up doing is you're actually putting it on the CG. And one of the things this manufacturer tells you is that you really want to go ahead and have a heavy engine up front. Matter of fact, they recommend a 50cc engine up front and no engine in the rear at all to get proper balance. But since we're doing electric, we need to concentrate on going through and getting our batteries so they're sitting as far forward as possible. The other option is this area here where the cockpit is located. We could go through and make a cut between right about here, going all the way around, and then going up through here as well. But the biggest issue is because the cockpit sits low, it doesn't provide enough space between the bottom of the cockpit inside the fuselage and when the landing gear is retracted into the fuselage itself. So what majority of the folks have found that have done the electric conversion is to take the front portion up in here and go through and cut it out. They're usually following the panel lines along here, and they're putting the batteries standing straight up. Now, I am not a big fan of that. I've tried it on one other plane. They're very difficult to strap down. And one of the things you got to remember when you're doing an electric conversion, you've got to consider the batteries and the weight. If a battery weighs, let's say, a pound, and you happen to be pulling 3 or 4 Gs, that 1 pound battery suddenly becomes a 3 or 4 pound battery. And you don't want the battery coming loose in flight because that would just lead to a nightmare. So we've decided to go ahead and make the cut here. We're going to actually lay the batteries flat. Now, we're going to go ahead, we're going to use the Gator RC tray, which you can see right here, laser cut tray. This is from Gator RC. They've got a number of different trays available. You get the actual laser cut tray, you get the Velcro straps, and you go through and you get a couple carbon fiber rods to hold the tray in place, and a few other things as well. Now, with the way that we determine first and foremost where we're going to make the cut in the front is what we did is we went ahead and we measured from here all the way back to the firewall itself. And then we went ahead and we added an extra 1/4 inch because of the thickness of the firewall, as you can see. Now, what we also did, once we determined where we're going to make the initial cut, we then took our tray, okay, and we placed our tray, as you can see, we placed our tray right on that initial line right there, as you can see, and then went ahead and marked it off back here. Now, in terms of width, what I determined is, believe it or not, the actual panel lines that run here, here, and then here are actually the perfect width. We want to make sure we can easily go ahead and get our tray in there, and then also make sure that we can easily take the batteries in and out. Now, the way I know this will work is because we also took our tray and I placed it here, and you can see the width of the tray is perfect. This is not, the width of the fuselage is not, the size of the fuselage will not impede the tray or accessing the batteries at all. And we can even lower the tray down below the center line, because what that does is that if we have, when we stack our batteries, because there's going to, one side's going to be 10S and the other side of the tray will also be 10S. When we stack our batteries, that's going to go ahead and let us help to ensure, that the batteries aren't so tall that they're affected by the hatch that we're creating. So let's go ahead, let's make our initial cut, and more to come. Ta-da! It worked great. Look at that. All right. Got our hatch, which is fantastic. As you can see, I will tell you this, folks, if you have an ESM model, they have one major problem, and that is they never use enough glue around their formers. This is the second one I've had, and I'm telling you, if you happen to locate an ESM model, whether it's still new in the box or someone has already built it, take a moment before you ever do anything with that plane. Make sure you run epoxy around each of the formers. And I'll show you what I mean in 2 seconds, because not only can we see it here, okay, in terms of how easy that was to lift off, but I'll show you something. All right, friends. So as I mentioned a second ago, ESM models, it's great kits, but they have one major problem. They do not put enough glue where the formers meet the fiberglass. And in this case, looking at the DO-335, there's no glue at all, as you can see. And so be very careful whenever you go through, as I mentioned previously, and you get one that is still in the box or one that's already been built. Take a moment, run glue where the formers meet the fuselage. You can see right back there, same thing with that former on both sides. Even where the wood meets other pieces of wood, sometimes there's no glue at all, and we can see that there. Now I will also show you, look on the firewall here, F1, notice no glue as well. So we've got to go through, we've got to run some glue all the way around that former. Now, this is the second ESM model I've had. The first one is back here. It is the Atom A500 by Condor Model Products, but manufactured by ESM Models. This was also notorious. When I built this one, I had to go through all the formers in the fuselage, run epoxy where the formers met the fiberglass, and this plane was notorious in that the landing gear blocks would fail on the boom. This is a twin boom aircraft. The landing gear blocks would fail because there wasn't enough glue holding the blocks in. So do keep that in mind. They're great airplanes, ESM, but they have that one major manufacturing flaw. All right, friends, more to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, we're trying to determine exactly where we're going to place the battery tray because there is not enough space between the front former here and this former here. So after taking a look at it, I realized we're going to take out this whole section here, this whole center section where you see these X mounts here. This hole would normally be for the front gas tank, which would pass through the square back in here. So we don't need that, and I think what we'll be able to do is we'll actually be able to take the tray and place it so it's flat on this portion here, and then that would give us enough height between the tray and the hatch to be able to put the batteries in, because the batteries are going to be quite tall since they're going to be stacked on top of each other. So let's go ahead, let's take out this portion here, and more to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, we have gone ahead, we've removed the X portion here of the former, and now we're trying to determine the exact height of where the tray needs to be placed. So when we look at, let me give you a couple tips. So when you're doing a conversion, there's a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, as I mentioned before, the height of the tray in relation to the hatch itself, because if you have a tall pack, which is what these tennis packs are, you don't want them butting up against the top of the hatch top itself. The other thing is you have to make sure the area is wide enough to get your hand in, not only get the battery in, but to get your hand in so you can grab the straps and pull them nice and tight. And one other thing to consider as well is if you look down there, you can see the screws coming out of the front firewall that hold the motor in place. You've got to make sure there's enough space not only for the screws to stay away from the batteries, but also if you need to remove those screws, perhaps if you have a blind nut of some kind, or a lock nut that is, excuse me, you got to be able to get that nut off. So keep that in mind. So we've kind of determined placement. Now, the other thing that we need to determine is as I mentioned before, is height. But on the bottom of this tray, and I'll show you real quick, on the bottom of this laser cut tray, there's a piece that's right here, and you can see it with the holes I'm pointing at with my finger. That comes with the tray. That'll get glued in place. That is where the carbon fiber tubes pass through to hold the tray in place. So what we're trying to determine is not only where the tray needs to sit in terms of height, but we need to determine exactly where those holes need to be drilled here on the sides of the fuselage, right along here. Okay, just to keep in mind, because you want to, that will then help to ensure that the that the tray is at the proper height and is positioned as level as possible. So I'm going to show you in a second how we determine exactly where we're going to drill the holes. One other thing that I realized we're going to need to do, we're going to need to take just this portion of the former off. I really was hoping to keep it there, but I realized it's just going to be in the way in terms of getting in and getting access to the battery. So let's make those changes, and let's go ahead and I'll take a moment to show you how we're going to drill our holes. More to come. All right, friends, let's take a moment and talk about how we determine exactly where the holes are going to be drilled for the part of the battery tray that's going to hold the tray in place. Now, if you're looking down, when you look down here at this particular view, you'll see down there the front edge of the battery tray, which is right there. And we've determined this is the proper distance between the firewall and the tray. Now, while you are looking at that front edge of the battery tray, go ahead and take a pencil. And while looking straight down at that edge, take your pencil and kind of make a mark on the side of the fuselage that lines up with that front edge of the battery tray, as you can see, sort of right about there, okay? Now, we've determined that the height of the battery tray is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of where it lines up with the edge of this particular opening where the exhaust would be. So we've made our mark here on the side, our little pencil mark. We're going to take the part of the battery tray, let's call it the battery tray holder, and we're going to use that as our template. Now keep in mind this front edge here where my finger is, that is the front of the battery tray. Where my index finger is right here, that is the bottom of the battery tray. So when we go through and we decide where the battery needs to sit, we're going to take our template, hold the front edge of the battery tray holder like this, and it'll line up like that, because remember where my thumb is, that's the bottom of the battery tray, and then we're going to be able to go ahead and drill our holes. And that should give us a proper placement, and we're just going to reproduce this on the opposite side as well. All right, friends, let's go ahead and drill our holes, and more to come. All right, friends, we have our battery tray in place. Let's talk about what we did. We went ahead and after we drilled our holes, we did go ahead and put in our carbon fiber rods, which you can see right here. And then we also put in our support rings, the plywood support rings, which are right here. They come with the battery tray kit, and they're very important. You want to make sure you use a lot of epoxy when you hold that in place. Also, we did have to clear away the former here. That former just got in the way, made it very difficult to insert the battery, so you'll need to get rid of that. Keep a little bit, though, here and on the opposite side. That's going to help to keep the actual hatch itself from falling in when you're trying to remove it or put it in place. Also, don't forget, epoxy your tray to the battery tray holder that we had earlier. Don't CA it because there's a lot of weight being generated on this tray. You don't want the tray popping loose in flight. Also, don't forget to put your straps on before you glue the tray to the actual battery tray holder itself. Otherwise, you're going to have a very difficult time getting the straps through. We're using, I think it's, I want to say probably about 100, or no, not 100 centimeters, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 150 centimeters straps, because these batteries are very tall, so you're going to need some really long straps, so just keep that in mind. All right, friends, let's go ahead and shift our focus now to our hatch, getting that in place, and also gluing on some Velcro onto the tray itself. All right, friends, more to come. All right, friends, we have our latch on our hatch, and it just looks fantastic. Went on really well. Now, one of the things you want to make sure you do is when you put your latch on your hatch, it's a good idea to go ahead and put a wheel collar on. You can see it right there. What that does, it allows you to get a better grip on it, so when you pull it back, you can also lift up the hatch. Now, the only thing we have to do on the other end of the hatch is we do have to put a little piece of wood here with a little peg or dowel or something to help hold the hatch in place when we're going through and either removing it or attaching the latch. All right, friends, let's go ahead and keep on keeping on. All right, friends, you can see we're continuing with our hatch, and what we did is we took a couple bamboo sticks here, bamboo skewers, cut them in half, and put one on each end. These two skewers or pieces will help keep the rear of the hatch from popping up in flight. And we did go ahead and glass them in place because sometimes there's mold release placed on some of these fiberglass molds, and CA doesn't always hold all that well if there's any remaining mold release of any kind. So a little fiberglassing does the trick. All right, friends, more to come. All right, friends, you can see our hatch is finished and it just works great. We're just going to take it. We're going to slip the rear portion right back in here. Take our front latch there, pull that back a little bit, let it settle down, and there you go. Perfect hatch. Looks great. Easy access to the batteries. All right, folks, we're going to shift our focus back to mounting our motors, and more to come.